The Miracle of Dunkirk. The Miracle of Dunkirk remains one of the most poignant and dramatic episodes of World War II. While it is celebrated as a heroic and miraculous evacuation, the experiences of those who lived through it bring a deeply human dimension to the story. The personal recollections of survivors, many of whom were soldiers who fought on the front lines or ordinary civilians who risked their lives to help, offer a vivid picture of the desperation, bravery, and unity that defined the Dunkirk evacuation. The soldier's perspective. For many soldiers, Dunkirk was a harrowing experience that began with a sense of disbelief and confusion as the German forces advanced rapidly. British soldier George Albert, who was there during the evacuation, later recalled the chaotic scene. It was total madness, a sense of doom. There were thousands of us packed together on the beaches, and the Germans were bombing us from the air. It felt like the end of the world. The men, many of them young and inexperienced, had been fighting for weeks as part of the British Expeditionary Force. They were suddenly cut off from their allies and stranded with no clear way out. There were moments of fear and despair, especially as the German Luftwaffe relentlessly bombed the beach. But there were also moments of courage. Soldiers were not only trying to survive, but also helping one another, despite the overwhelming odds. One survivor, Private John Robinson, who was part of the rearguard holding off German forces to buy time for the evacuation, remembered how they felt about the civilian boats that began arriving. When we saw those boats coming from England, we thought it was a dream. It gave us hope. We didn't care what kind of boats they were, fishing boats, pleasure craft, anything. We just knew we had a chance to get out of there. As the soldiers crowded the beaches and the small boats began to arrive, they formed long lines, some walking into the sea to wade to the vessels while others waited for their turn. The sight of ships and boats ferrying them to safety became an emotional lifeline for many soldiers who had resigned themselves to being captured or killed. The role of civilians. On the other side of the channel, civilians in Britain had already begun to respond to the call to help. Winston Churchill had issued an urgent appeal for civilian vessels to assist in the evacuation, and the response was overwhelming. Ordinary citizens, many of whom had no experience with military operations, sailed across the dangerous waters of the English Channel, risking their lives to rescue soldiers. One of the most touching personal accounts came from a civilian, Mrs. Edith Taylor, who had sailed from Dover in her small fishing boat, the Sea Breeze. She recalled the harrowing experience. When we reached Dunkirk, we could see the bombs falling around us and the smoke from the fires. We were just a small boat among hundreds of others, but we felt a duty to help. We picked up as many soldiers as we could and brought them back. I remember one man. He was covered in oil and dirt, and he grabbed my hand with tears in his eyes. I'll never forget his words. "You saved my life, lady." The small civilian boats, often no bigger than fishing vessels, worked in tandem with the larger naval ships to ferry as many soldiers as possible from the beaches to the waiting ships offshore. Despite the constant threat of German attacks from the air and the sea, these civilian vessels played a vital role in what became a massive, unplanned operation. The airman's role. The British Royal Air Force, RAF, also had a pivotal role during the Dunkirk evacuation, providing cover for the soldiers and the civilian boats. The Luftwaffe had launched relentless attacks on the soldiers and boats trying to leave Dunkirk, and the RAF's job was to defend them as best as they could. One RAF pilot, Flight Lieutenant Harry Williams, who participated in the air battles over Dunkirk, remembered the intensity of the fighting. The sky was filled with smoke and gunfire. It was constant, and we were outnumbered, but we knew we had to protect those on the ground and those in the boats. We would strafe German planes and try to give cover to the soldiers trying to get to safety. We lost many good men up there. Williams recalled how difficult it was to watch the civilian boats below, knowing that every attack from the Luftwaffe risked the lives of those on the beaches and in the water. The combination of RAF and civilian boat support helped give the soldiers a fighting chance, but it was a constant struggle against the Germans' overwhelming air superiority. The final moments. By June 4, 1940, the evacuation was deemed a success. A total of 330,000 soldiers, including over 100,000 French and Belgian troops, were evacuated to Britain. For the survivors, the memory of Dunkirk is one of mixed emotions: relief at having survived, but also sadness and guilt at leaving so many of their comrades behind. One soldier, Corporal Harry Matthews, who made it safely to Britain, spoke of his mixed feelings. We were all so grateful to get away, but it felt wrong to leave behind so many who hadn't made it. It felt like we were running away from something. But when we got back to England, we knew the fight was far from over. Dunkirk wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the struggle. Churchill's famous speech, in which he declared, "We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall never surrender," encapsulated the mood of those who had survived Dunkirk. They knew they had been given a second chance, but they also understood that the war was far from over. The legacy. Dunkirk became a symbol of hope, unity, and resilience. The personal stories of survival and bravery, both from the soldiers and the civilians who helped them, are part of what makes the event so memorable. The miracle of Dunkirk was not just in the logistics of the evacuation, but in the spirit of determination that arose in the face of overwhelming adversity. Survivors would often reflect on how, despite the chaos and the fear, the sense of solidarity among soldiers and civilians was the true miracle that allowed so many to escape. In the years after the war, many of those who survived Dunkirk would look back at the event with a sense of pride, knowing that their participation in this extraordinary effort had helped shape the course of history. This content has been adapted from the powerful features of Poly Speaks For You, South Africa's leading accessibility software. Learn more at www.polyspeaksforyou.co.za. We invite you to support this meaningful dyslexic initiative, crafted and developed by an individual who personally understands the challenges of dyslexia.